This edition of the Ridley Report is brought to you by
ridleyreport.com podcast version. Listen while you're doing something else. I use 4K video downloader to download these. Or, well, other people's podcasts, other people's speeches and interviews that last more than 20 minutes. Heck, I've got a whole regimen going now. I have a list of, 50 different interesting people, and every week I'll bleed the internet dry of that particular person, and then I'll go move on to the next person, and a week later. Ray Kurzweil, Joe Rogan, Andreas Antonopoulos, so on. Although Antonopoulos is good because actually you can just listen to him on YouTube. You won't have to sit through ads or something like that. I was trying to watch a YouTube video yesterday, 10 minutes long, and was interrupted by ads 3 times. It wasn't even worth it. I mean, it was probably the only documentary I've ever seen on the Swiss air war in World War II. Beautiful concept, just sort of a fan film type thing. Like a person made a documentary in their basement, basically. But it was just really, compared to everything else that's out there, it was a great look at the subject. But ruined by YouTube. Okay, anyway. If I use 4K video downloader, it takes out the ads, and then I have it on my hard drive until I don't want it. So, great for either, downloading the video as an MP4 or just converting it straight into MP3 right there on the spot as you're downloading, so you can put it on an MP3 player or whatnot. They're trying to unfuck the world, and I will try to tell you more about what's been going on in New Hampshire, where the world is in its arguably least fucked state. At least over the last 10 years. So, a message I saw from Brent Kent Robinson on Facebook. Quote, "For those of you looking to vote this evening who are being forced to have your ballot cast outside your visibility by proxy, you can and should fight this. A 91-year-old and his friend today refused to comply with mandatory mask rules at his polling location. The police were called, and they decided to allow him to vote normally, despite refusing to accept the alternate voting path offered to him. He did so without a mask. You can too," unquote. So there was an article in the Portsmouth Herald about it, apparently, or the seacoastonline.com. And named Warren Goddard, according to the article, quote, "He explained he went inside the polls without a face mask, was told he had to wear one or vote outside, and refused to do both." Goddard said after an officer at the polls told him he'd have to leave if he wasn't wearing a mask, he replied, "I am not leaving here without a cop taking me out." 2 additional officers arrived on the scene, and Goddard and Gallagher were allowed to vote, maskless, inside the school polls. Gallagher, who wore a Gadsden flag on her lapel, said she and Goddard want to be good citizens and obey the Constitution. She said they stood up for the courage of our convictions while poll workers were bullying us, unquote. So, I can vouch for the fact that these poll people are not some sort of independent force. They're not there to help the voters. They are part of the government. And they are the enemy. Up to a point, certainly we've all had some that we've interacted with who have been very professional, polite, and helpful. But I've experienced this myself here in Winchester, one of the least bad places in New Hampshire, in terms of having a kind of a nice government, relatively speaking. But I had a series of disturbing things that happened to me just on one occasion while I was voting. And this was November 2018, back in the days before YouTube was suppressing my hits. You can see this 5,000 hit video where the town moderator kind of loses his mind because I'm running a camera. He tries to keep me from filming my own voting process. You're not allowed to film beyond this line, he's saying. And another person comes up and tries to look at my ballot. Oh yeah, just a seemingly random person who wouldn't identify themselves He tries to look over my shoulder as I'm filling out the paperwork and starts interrogating me. And then flees the scene, of course, when I film him. Of course, what triggered a lot of this was that I was filming my process, right? Once they started, when I tried to register, they did start to ask me some questions, and I thought I should film the questioning process. And the lady who was actually asking me all the questions was pretty cool, and she didn't really mind being filmed much, it seemed like. But yeah, the way the cop was looking at me who was in there, it was like really unfriendly and serious. The town moderator says he already knows who I am, and he doesn't trust my reputation, and it's just all this, it's harassment for being someone who films things, essentially. Government things. I mean, it was the low point of all my interactions with all officials inside the municipality of Winchester. From there, things have been getting better, actually pretty dramatically. But anyway, and there's also this video, again, I'm trying to make the point about election officials. There's this video where Ian Freeman and Darryl Perry and Keene are trying to go into a polling place, and Perry is carrying some sort of piece of literature, so they rip it out of his hands right there on the camera. Anyway, going back to this Portsmouth pair, Gallagher, quote, Gallagher said she and her friend were ultimately allowed to vote inside the polls without masks. I went in, I made a ballot and put it in the machine, Goddard said. The masks are all political. Unquote. And that's a good point, because I was just listening to some apparently authoritarian survivalists who are just go along to get along guys, apparently, on a different podcast, who were saying the masks are not political. It's not a political issue. Well, when someone tells you something's not a political issue, that's kind of their way of telling you you're not allowed to debate about it. A no politics rule is sort of that's a no free speech rule. And of course, we see what that has led to inside these polling places where they have these rules, no politics inside the What do you think this is? It's a goddamned election. How can it not be politics? I was calling talk radio about 6 months ago about, so I guess there was some new rule where you weren't allowed to wear a political shirt into the polling area, and we'll find out how that played out during this September primary 2020. In one case, I think we will talk about that. I think I wrote it down. Anyway, Rebecca Knott on Facebook posts, quote, is anyone else concerned with the number of people who are not allowed to put their ballot in the ballot box themselves after voting today? They already treated many of you like a common criminal, not allowing you to enter the regular voting area, and barely feigned their disgust at your bare faces. Do we trust them to deposit your ballots properly? I hate to be so distrustful, but this is concerning me, especially because I feel I've seen about 50... Okay, unquote. That's where I ran out. I didn't copy the rest. Anyway... Yeah, that is a great point. I was thinking, right before I just read this a second ago, I was thinking, I'm not sure. If you think about it, you got to trust them anyway, because after you turn your ballot in or put it in there, the voting system is probably rigged after that to some extent or flawed. But that's right. If you don't draw attention to yourself when you're going into there to vote, they don't know who to call, right? And if you are showing yourself to be pro-liberty, possibly by standing up for yourself on any issue, they know to call that ballot, right? They know to keep that person from voting their Democrat out of office. And this would seem likely to lead it, this kind of behavior would tend to be pro-Democrat, just because Democrats are more heavily represented in the government, in the bureaucracy. But even if I had thought this was a trivial matter, I like to say I don't care what people are standing up for, as long as they're standing up for themselves against the government. Even if I think their arguments are a little bit frivolous, at least they're doing something. Other news, Free Keen is reporting that one of the co-hosts of libertarian talk show Free Talk Live has won the Republican nomination for sheriff in Cheshire County, the Keene area, New Hampshire. The article begins, quote, "She-Male defeats longtime resident Republican candidate to face incumbent Democrat for sheriff. For Cheshire County Sheriff in general election. Aria DeMezzo, spotlight on the candidates Aria DeMezzo. The self-described she-male anarchist running for Cheshire County Sheriff as a Republican has soundly defeated longtime candidate for Sheriff Earl Nelson, 10-1, and now moves on to face Democrat incumbent Sheriff Eli Rivera in the general election November 3rd. Unquote. So I guess this is Aria's second run for this office. She ran in 2018, only got 2.3% of the vote. It was a three-way race in that at that point. This part's probably not very helpful. Aria apparently also describes herself as a high priestess of the Reformed Satanic Church. Unquote. That should bring in a lot of votes. But it also might bring in some publicity. Well, what was it David Minson once said? You know, Dave, I was alive during the 60s. At the beginning, it was a family. And at the end, it was a freak show. So it has been for the libertarian movement in New Hampshire. Or the Free Stater thingy, whatever you want to call it. And sometimes I'm probably part of the problem. But what do we got to lose, right? Anyway, I had indicated that I would spew some sort of information related to the ban on wearing political shirts. And although I did not manage, I apparently never copied the article. I can remember a little bit. Apparently, a young lady was wearing a shirt that said something like it had a picture of John McCain and it said "Hero." And it had a picture of Donald Trump, and it said 0. She wore that into a polling place and was turned away. You're not allowed to vote while wearing that shirt. So she just took it off and went back in. So apparently, so good on her. That is the New Hampshire way. Topless voting. And I believe she was allowed to vote topless. However, the problem is, all these stories, again, they're just stories because hardly anyone is getting video. At least none of these stories had video associated with them. I'm sure if I go to YouTube and I do a search for some videos, I'll probably find a few. And I think I'll do that next, and I'll tell you more about what happened as the news continues to trickle out from our fraudulent elections. Or untrustworthy elections, at least. I don't know if they're fraudulent for sure, because you can't tell. You can't get close to these people to film them unless you wear a mask. That weeds out a lot of the people who would otherwise be more active. It wouldn't weed me out. I'd just wear the mask and get the video. Getting the video is more important. But anyway, to those who are accusing us of making the election process a farce, I will say it was already a farce. Now it just looks like what it is. And this isn't a new thing, having conflicts at the polls, right? I mean, even in normal times, there were all these different problems, all these different misbehaviors. But it can be done in a relatively responsible and professional manner. Whenever all my experiences at Bedford, until Ted Gatzis showed up one day, have been positive. When I lived in Bedford, both town moderators were really nice, receptive. They've been interviewed. I've interviewed them on my channel. There's lots of transparency, no filming restrictions. When I tried to interview Ted Gatzis as he was going there to vote, as he was running for governor, he kind of freaked out, and a reporter hit me. Well, yeah, she hit my camera. I think she hit me too, if I recall. It's kind of hard to make contact with a small camera without contacting a person's hand. She lost her mind because I tried to film her interview with the governor, right? The governor candidate. I was filming, part of her interview while waiting my chance to interview him. She was interviewing him about something really important, though. They were talking about his tie. This actually made it into the news and the mainstream press. But again, these are not election officials at the Bedford polling place. And because it's such a busy polling place, you would expect there to be more conflict there than there was over the years that I've been there. But it's one of the most concentrated voting places in New Hampshire, and that's why you see mainstream media there. They know they'll have a lot of people to photograph or question. Project Veritas, I think, was active during this primary election, and I would encourage you to go to their YouTube channel and find some of their viral videos about New Hampshire voting processes. They have been, I think one of their people was prosecuted for filming the voting process. Now, he did it with a hidden camera, which, of course, you should be able to do. But New Hampshire's wiretapping law, basically forces you to inform people when you're recording. However, this is sad. I'm looking over all the recent YouTube videos with a keyword search, New Hampshire voting, and I didn't see anyone document their own process or their own fights. It's possible that these videos are being suppressed, but I'm pushing pretty deep and hard into this, and I'm just not seeing. I'm just not seeing people whipping out their cameras. That was a lot of double entendres in one sentence, wasn't it? Oh well. Live to tape. A 40-pound exotic cat from Africa apparently went on the loose in New Hampshire, but was found. Oh, and here's something nice. Police chief fights to keep officer who sent racist texts off force in New Hampshire. This is from the Charlotte Observer, which sounds like that might actually not be in New Hampshire. But anyway, quote, a New Hampshire police department is fighting against reinstating an officer fired 2 years ago over racist text messages. Fallout over the firing of then Manchester Police Department officer Aaron Brown has been ongoing since a labor arbitrator ruled in August 2019 that Brown should be rehired, determining his determination was too severe and he should have been given a 30-day suspension. Listen, folks, unquote. Listen, if somebody wants to fire you, they get to fire you. You would think. That's how it works in the open market or the less governed market. But in government, this is why police departments are so F-bombed up. Is it has to be like a process that involves the whole community. And the worst thing is we're lucky it's that way. It would be worse if it was really easy for the government to get things done. Then things would be even worse. Because the government is so bad, all these things have to be done to hamstring it. But then, when the government maybe tries to do the right thing, then it goes nowhere. At least in this case, they're trying to maybe do the right thing. I don't know. I need to know more about these texts, and I'll get to that shortly. But, I used to say, like, it was really difficult to get a police officer fired, and I guess this is proof that it still is. And yet, if you had a liberty-leaning police officer, it would only take 5 minutes, right? Well, we saw what happened with Brad Jardis, the one openly pro-freedom police officer in New Hampshire. They really came after him. But again, they did have, they had this process they had to go through, and they were unsuccessful in firing him. They were successful in intimidating him, essentially, into leaving the force over time. It made his job pretty untenable. But ultimately, it was him who decided to leave. Or he who decided to leave, whichever. So again, none of this really matters unless we actually, in this particular case, all that really matters is what the exact words were in the text. All of us should be suspicious when someone accuses someone else of a racist text. Just don't worry about whether they think it's racist or not. Just go straight to the text itself. And guess what? That's the part that hasn't been revealed. That's hidden information. Well, we should just be able to see the exact words. Only the exact quote matters. I understand if a news article can't fit that in the headline, but of course, in this case, they're not even allowed to because they haven't been allowed to see the text. Again, release the information. If the government did it, we should know it. We paid for it, right? But here you see where, with Chief Capano at Manchester, at least, his hands may be tied. He may be forced to go through some process. Maybe eventually he'll be forced to rehire this guy. But he's showing that you can do stuff even with your hands tied. He's at least able to use the bully pulpit. He's denounced this officer, and he said they're going to try and make sure that he never serves on the force again. So, maybe he's pushing in the right direction. If this guy really did terrible things, then okay. Because there's an accusation here, again, racist. Who cares whether someone's a racist or not? What matters is whether or not they do bad things. And this officer has been accused of admitting to... He's accused of claiming to have intentionally damaged property. That's what he's accused of. That while carrying search warrants. Now that should be the headline, you would think, because that's action. But no, in America, everyone loses their mind over speech, not action. So, but at least this accusation does raise more concerns than just an accusation of racism would raise. All right, that's what I got for now. Come on, guys. If you're confronted by authorities, get your cameras out and film it instead of calling the newspaper the next day. Well, do both. Just remember to inform everybody that you're audio taping. Oh, and one more thought. It's interesting how, people say, well, if most of the cops were good, then you would see the bad cops, singled out and ejected from the force. Well, here, a police chief is actually, it seems like he's trying to do that. If these accusations against the cop are correct, about him just, damaging property on purpose during warrants, even then, the system is so corrupt and so misconfigured, even in New Hampshire, that it tries to stop them from ejecting the alleged bad apple. Because of this union stuff that's going on and labor arbitration and this idea that people have a right to jobs, or let alone a right to government jobs. Okay, enough ranting. Ridley out.
Driving in circles around Central Keene, I hurl both insults, angry and mean, against the activists from Free Keene, who wander around thinking as though they were free, and even though they aren't hurting me, I will hate them hatefully, urging their appearance in the penitentiary, although that expense would be charged to me. I'm starting to feel somewhat confusedly